Hi everybody, my name is Emma, this is Emma Rose in Books, and today I'm going to do a book review for you about the new book from Amy Brown, Informed is Best. This came out last week, I'll put the date below, I forget the exact date. I received this book as a review copy. It's the first review copy of a book I've ever received, so I'm so grateful for that. It's really exciting as somebody who talks about books and reviews books to actually get a review copy. It's like a new milestone, and I'm a real fan of Amy Brown's work. I've bought all of her previous 3 books and read all of them, so yeah, to receive one as a review copy was wonderful, and thank you very much. Now, if you're new to my channel, I'm interested in reading all sorts of different kinds of books, but in terms of non-fiction, the 2 areas I'm interested in reading about are early parenting, particularly breastfeeding, and also marine biology, 2 completely unlinked fields, linked by the fact that I like both of them. So this very much falls into that category. Now, this book is something new. This is not a how-to kind of a book. It's not a this is how to breastfeed, this is how to parent, this is, you know, or giving you all, it's not even giving you the information about how to do those things. It's about deciding which information is reliable. Now let me just read the beginning of the blurb for you. It's got quite a long blurb, which I'll stick below actually. I'll just read the beginning bit. From the moment you share the news that you are pregnant or have a new baby, it feels like everyone becomes an expert. Did you see that headline? Did you hear that story on TV? Have you heard the latest about what they say is best? In a world overflowing with information telling you what is best for you and your baby, making decisions can feel overwhelming. Who do you trust? Who is telling the truth? And how do you know if what they are saying is right for you? How? By becoming your own expert in sorting the media spin and politics from the actual facts and data. So that's what this book is about. As I say, it's not filled with this is what you should do or anything like that. It's saying, okay, when you're provided with information. Now, this is something very interesting because parenting information and health messages change all the time, and it was something that when I had my first child I found it really confusing, particularly for me around weaning. So when I decided to start giving my son solids, first of all the advice had changed from being to wean from about 4 months to you need to wean from 6 months. And because previous generations to me had all weaned, some of them much earlier, some of them at 3 months, to be saying no, I'm not going to give my baby any food till 6 months was a real challenge. So I had a lot of pressure around me from people saying, you need to give this baby some food, this baby's hungry, particularly because around 4 months there's a developmental leap that means babies get a bit fussy and kind of don't sleep so well. And a lot of people use that as evidence of your baby needs food, they're hungry, that's why they're waking up. So for a start I was trying to use the new information and the new research to say, no, I know what I'm talking about, this is what I've been told to do, health professionals have told me this is the latest thing, whilst fighting against people who felt that they knew better because they'd had kids and, you know. The other side of that is then when I started to introduce solids, when you're looking at what to give, first of all there's a whole dilemma about whether you should spoon feed a baby or whether they should feed themselves. And then there's also questions around what you give them. So should you give them peanuts? Advice changed from no, don't give them to them until they're 2 to no, give them to them if you've got no reason to suspect they have a peanut allergy. Give them peanuts and it actually reduces the risk of allergy, I think was what they were saying. So then it's like, well, what do I do? Should I wait or should I not wait? Which bit of science is correct? And then I'd look up, can I give my baby apples? Oh, no, you're not supposed to give them till this time. Or can I give them meat? Can I give them strawberries? Can I give them berries? Can I give them eggs? Can I, you know? And because I had allergies when I was a child, I still am a bit kind of eczema prone and I react to things every now and again. I was twitchy about allergies. And there's all this information out there. I had no idea what I should follow. Should I follow what the health visitors were saying? Should I follow what I was finding on the internet? You know, and it's not the only area that's like that. A lot of early parenting, you've got conflicting information between new advice and old advice, between what your peers or elders are saying depending on kind of socially or culturally what was done before. You've got different camps of researchers sometimes saying different things, and when all you're trying to do is do the best for your baby, it's really, really hard. So that's kind of where this book comes in. So the kind of things that are covered in this book are from the titles of the chapters, the things like how the news media shapes our views, the role of the internet, about social media, stuff about how research works, how scientific research works, how that then gets disseminated in the media, all that kind of stuff. So that's what it's about. It's about interpreting that information. Now, Amy Brown is a professor at Swansea University. She, I believe, comes from a psychology background, and she works in kind of public health type research. So she's really well placed to talk about how that works, how research gets done, and how that then leads through to sort of public health messages. So the other interesting thing for me, in terms of my personal relationship to this book, is that my background, so my degree, my first degree is a bachelor's in marine biology, so that's a science discipline. So I was trained during that degree to respect scientific method, to look at research as ideally you want to always have a control group, you always want big samples as much as possible, you're looking at a dependent and an independent variable, and all these kind of things, whether these are kind of terms you've come across before or not. And so when I learnt about methodology, what I learnt about was things like looking at different kinds of population sampling, or looking at the difference between kind of testing chemical toxicity to, you know, like techniques. When I then did my second degree, which is a master's in education, that's a social science. And in social sciences it works differently. So when they talk about qualitative data, it's not just talking about, oh, for instance, qualitative data in the different eye colours, so those are words, they're not quantitative, they're not numbers, so if I surveyed different eye colours that would be qualitative data, but I can still analyse that statistically in a certain way. What they're talking about in social sciences is things like questionnaires, so I've gone out and asked people what they think about this, and then I've looked for themes in what they've said, and I've put those into patterns and drawn diagrams of how they relate to each other and analysed them using different theories, or that kind of thing. And so when I first started studying my master's in education, to me it felt like it wasn't science. It wasn't, I was like, how can you draw conclusions from, I went and asked some people some questions and then I thought about it critically. It's like, that's not science. And I found it really, really hard to understand what it is that Amy Brown says in here, which is the fact that yes, scientific method and things like randomised control trials, I'm skipping down, have a place because of how rigorous they are, and that, you know, there's a reason that they're respected. But for instance, if you get data about, okay, 80% of women initiate breastfeeding in hospital, great, that's a brilliant bit of data. They asked lots of women and that's what they said. If you then want to know things like, why did they initiate it? Why did the 20% not initiate it? How many of them continue? What do they mean by initiation? What were the experiences of those women within that context? That's where the qualitative stuff comes in. So that's really interesting for me, because I kind of went through those emotions of understanding that actually the two types of research come together like a jigsaw puzzle to give you the numbers and then the explanations behind that. And anyway, she goes into all of that kind of detail about how research happens, about methodology, about all of that stuff. So yeah, that's all very interesting. Anyway, I will come back to that point. I'm going to move again because that's what I do in all of my videos, because I can't keep still. Okay, so I'm going to read you a few quotes from the book, and then hopefully I can kind of make all of these thoughts come together. So let me see, what have I marked just to illustrate a few points of what I liked. Oh, so here, this is in the first chapter, and she says, she's talking about social contagion, so where you can catch things, not as in terms of like passing an illness to somebody, but it's kind of the same concept. You see what I mean? So rioting, stockpiling, daft toy crazes sweeping the internet. These are all examples of social contagion, which can even be seen when it comes to pregnancy and birth. Examples of behaviours that have been shown to be socially caught are teenage pregnancy, pregnancy rates in offices is not your imagination, they double in the year after someone else has a baby, and postnatal depression. I found that really interesting. So she goes through things like that. She goes, because she has a psychology background, she goes through psychology stuff which was all new information to me. And I like that, because I remember when there were some twins at our breastfeeding group, and I mean, my baby was born probably a year after that. It was so cute. But there is that thing, it just, it's interesting that is a real thing, because I didn't know it was. You know where in an office they say, oh, don't sit on that chair, everyone who sits on that chair gets pregnant, there's all those kind of things. That's actually a thing. It's not that you're actually catching it, it's just like a psychological thing. I thought that was interesting. There's another bit where she looks at how media shapes our views and how things are reported, how that then affects what you think. So for instance, she talks about what's the teenage pregnancy rate? The perception is 15% of girls under 16, but the reality is 0.6%, so a misperception of 25 times as many. Another example are crime levels falling. 58% say no, crime rates are falling every year. And goes through some examples talking about the fact that the way that things are reported has an effect on our perception of how prevalent that thing is. So she goes through a lot about how the media works and how the media report things and how our brains interpret that as well. So that's very interesting. Bookmarked just a couple of things in here. So the next one that I've bookmarked, let's see. This is something that's very of the moment right now. So another major predictor of illness risk is socioeconomic status. The very best thing you can do for your health, sadly, is to make sure you're not poor. If only that were so easy. Most illnesses are socially patterned, with those living in the most deprived conditions having the worst outcomes across pregnancy, birth and infant health. Globally, mothers are at a distinct health advantage because they're female. Add in a layer of racial disparity on top, and many mothers are at a further health disadvantage because they are not white. Even in the UK, women of colour die in childbirth at a rate of 5 times that of white women. And it's not, as some people would like to make out, just because of underlying existing health issues, but rather complex systemic prejudice. Who you are and how you are perceived by others matters when it comes to your health at a shocking level. This is when she's discussing what risk means and the difference between relative and absolute risk. And so when things are reported as a risk, your risk is whatever of this, she's explaining all of that. But I thought that that was an interesting point, and yeah, it's very relevant at the moment. There's a lot of talk about that right now. And then finally, I like this where she talks about strange risks, and for me this got me really thinking about the way that we think about things and the way that we behave. But then there are strange risks. A disturbing recent study from India showed that you are now 5 times more likely to die from an accident while taking a selfie than from being killed by a shark. Although at this point you should also be asking 5 times what? What's the real risk to me? How many people actually die in selfie-related accidents? Similarly, a table of risks presented in the BMJ finds that you're more likely to die playing football than you are by murder. Although I'm guessing you actually have to occasionally play football for that risk to occur. She also goes on to talk about how some of those risks, so for instance, you're more at risk of falling down the stairs and dying than you are of being killed in a terrorist attack. But because you don't have control over the terrorist attack, it's a more terrifying thing. Whereas falling downstairs, it's not, although it's more risky, you still walk downstairs, but you get people who won't go into London because they're afraid of terrorist attacks. I just think it's interesting when you look at weighing up risk. So, for instance, for me, when I thought about having a home birth, I was weighing up the risk of, in a home birth, the fact that you're not at a hospital, so if something goes very wrong, you've got to get an ambulance. For me, I'm about 20 miles away from the major hospitals I need to go to, so I'm putting myself at that risk. But you're weighing that up against things like the risk of infection in hospital. For me, there was a psychological risk that would affect potentially my birth could be longer or have more complications because I wasn't feeling at ease, and equally the postnatal period, it could have impacts there. So comparing those risks and also looking at things like what I was being told by the health professionals around me and the things that I was reading compared to what people were anecdotally telling me about. Oh, well, what if you have a hemorrhage and die? And it's like, well, what if, I don't want that to happen, but then what are the real risks of that? And then you talk to your midwife, and your midwife says, well, we're trained to handle that. And in fact, I live in an area with a high home birth rate, so the midwives are very well equipped to deal with home births because it's common around here. You have to weigh up all these things of, I mean, for instance, when I had my home birth, I knew that there was a risk of where I lived that I could get snowed in. And so I'd spoken to them and said, well, what happens if I am in labour and having a home birth and there's an emergency and get snowed in? And they said, oh, you'd be airlifted. I was like, well, I'm scared of flying, that ain't happening. So we decided that if there was a risk of snow, I was going to go into hospital. you find yourself weighing these things, and it's very hard because you're looking at kind of what's the likelihood of something happening, how afraid of it am I, how serious is it to me. You can see how it can be so complex, and how a book like this really helps you to try and think objectively about these things, and to understand how the original research that underpins what the risk is of these things, that you can actually access that. From my point of view as somebody with a science degree and a social sciences degree, I can read journal articles, got no problem with reading them. I also understand the fact that scientists aren't infallible. I mean, you know, plenty of scientists have got it wrong in the past and have been discredited or whatever, or work is built on other work. You know, there's a lot of things we don't know, there's a lot of things that we have wrong, there's a lot of things that we don't fully know. And I think people have a tendency to think scientists know it all, and they don't. They're people, they're you know, they can get things wrong. And so to understand that, and to understand that when you read a journal that is reporting something, it's not necessarily the truth, I mean, or the whole truth, or it can be blown up. For instance, there's an example in here where she talks about a study that was reported as like, don't use hand gel because it can get into your breast milk or something like that. And it was based on a study where mice were fed the chemicals that are in hand gel, and then they looked at the outcomes of that. Well, you're probably not eating hand gel, and of course, yeah, there's a risk of it's on your hands and then but that's not the same thing, and you can't report it as the same thing. I think that was what the study said, it was something along those lines. So I think understanding that, and understanding that like a study on mice isn't the same as a study in humans, and a study with 5 people isn't the same as a study with 100 people, and that sometimes people can investigate something and actually they've not taken into account confounding variables and that kind of stuff. And to realise that science is an ever-changing thing, and that's why it's peer-reviewed. Funnily enough, a conversation I had the day before I started reading this book was about peer review, where my husband was saying, but journals are peer-reviewed. And I said, well, they're not, I mean they are, but what happens is you submit your article. If the journal want to publish it, they then send it to people working within your field, who could be anybody. They peer review it, and then those comments go back and it's decided whether that's going to be published or not. It's not as if your article has been read by hundreds of people who have then decided whether you are a scientist. You know, it's not like that. Yes, people do read it within your field to make sure, but they may not be the experts that you think they are. They're not necessarily professors. I've peer-reviewed a journal article once and then I got really scared and was like, I don't have the expertise to do this. It's because I once wrote a letter to the editor and ended up on some kind of review board. It was terrifying. You know, who am I to peer review something? I worked as a teacher, but I didn't work as an academic really. You know, I wasn't working in research. What the hell do I know? Anyway, so yeah, peer review isn't necessarily like the gold standard that people think it is. So anyway, to cut to the chase, it's got very interesting content, that's my point. And it's something very, very new. So in terms of a new approach, to not say this is the advice, because the advice changes, but to say this is how to interpret the advice and how to not be overwhelmed by it. And that's fantastic. The other side of this is I think that this would be a really good book for anybody who is entering sciences. So if you're thinking of doing a degree in science or psychology or any kind of social science or anything like that, this is just such a good overview of research and how it works. And it's written for a layperson. So although there are books out there about methodology aimed at students, this is written for a general audience, so it's very readable. Now, I suppose that leads into the only reservation that I have, although this is absolutely written in a really readable way. For me reading it, it's hard for me to kind of extrapolate, because I'm reading this as somebody with a science degree and a social sciences degree. So therefore, a reasonable chunk of the information I already knew. I already know how something's reported in a journal. I already know about ideas like bias. I already know about, I kind of understand risk, and I've taught a lot of these things. When you're reading something that you already have a good understanding of, it's easier to read. But if you're reading something where everything you're reading is completely new, then that makes it harder going. Even if it's written really accessibly, it makes it like a slower read, just a lot to take in. And I suppose that's my reservation, is that if somebody reads this who have no kind of background in any of that, that this is just a lot to take in. And although it's a fantastic book, as I say, that would be I would be really interested actually in, as I say, people who aren't within those worlds, of how they got on with it and how they read it, because it's hard to judge accessibility, I suppose, when you're already able to read it. But to me it seemed like everything was explained really, really clearly, and the things that I wasn't familiar with I understood really well, and there were really good examples given. So yeah, as I say, if you have read this and you don't come from any of those kind of academic backgrounds, then please do comment, because I really would be interested in that. But I think that this is just amazing. There's a really fresh approach out there. So if, like me, a parent is feeling really overwhelmed with what should I do, I don't know who to believe. Should I believe a health professional? Should I believe my mum? Should I believe, you know, because health professionals, again, might not have read all the literature, or they may not be understanding of it. You know, they're not necessarily up to date. Who knows? Should I believe a researcher? Should I believe BBC News? Should I believe, like, online health, like the NHS website? Should I, you know, what? And you find yourself weighing it all up, and actually knowing what is reliable, what are good sources of information, and being aware of the fact that things change, and being able to weigh up how important are these things to me. The other thing that I really, really liked in here, she talks about the fact that even if you know what the risks are, even if you know what the health information is, sometimes you make choices that you know aren't the best. For instance, I really like drinking diet or zero Coke. I know it's awful for me, but I drink it anyway because I know what the risks are, and somehow I've weighed that up and it's fine. So, you know, we all have health messages and don't necessarily go with them. And the other thing that she points out is the fact that you can have made a decision about birth and decided that the best outcome based on all of your research and your understanding, sorry, not the best outcome, the best course of action, maybe I'm going to have a vaginal delivery or whatever. And then when it comes down to it, something happens and it's suggested that actually maybe a caesarean would be a good idea, and in that time and place the best option is for you to have a caesarean. So as in, things change and you can weigh up all of these things differently. And I think that's an interesting viewpoint, because that idea of, you know, or such and such is the best course of action, being able to say, well, you've got to contextualise it, is really important, particularly somebody who's really interested in breastfeeding. And although there's lots of evidence to say that there are lots of benefits of breastfeeding, there are circumstances where it doesn't work for somebody, and that doesn't mean that, you know, they didn't do their best. It means that within their context it's the best course of action for them. I haven't explained that well at all, but hopefully you can see what I mean, that it's just about weighing up, you know, your own family, the risks that are important to you, what has happened within your life, all the stuff, and being able to put it all together and realise that it's not as simple as saying, you know, all of you should stop overeating because cake. And, you know, just think that it's sensibly written. I don't know where that rant went, but good. So it's a really good book. Like I said, I really recommend this for parents who are feeling very overwhelmed, or people within the sort of health profession, birth world, who would like a bit more information on how research goes on and how it gets disseminated and all that kind of stuff. And equally, like I said, if you're an academic, even though it's focused on the birth world, this is a really, really good guide to methodology that also includes how things go through the media, social media, and all that stuff. This is an excellent book. I really, really would recommend. I gave it 5 stars. You can follow me on Goodreads and all that stuff below. Check out Amy Brown's other books, they are very good. And yeah, excellent. So please like if you did. Please comment if you've read this book, you've read other similar things, you have thoughts on what I've said. And please subscribe for more videos about reading, about writing, bookish things, and I hope to see you all next time. Take care.